In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that most species refuse to acknowledge. Appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. The Galactic Council learned this lesson the hard way when they encountered humanity for the first time. Among the diplomatic envoys, military attachés, and seasoned negotiators stood a young woman in a simple uniform, barely out of her teens by human standards. She spoke little, observed much, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that most aliens mistook for inexperience. They saw her youth and dismissed her as irrelevant. They noticed her gender and assumed she was decorative. They observed her silence and believed she was powerless. The Council's greatest military minds, beings who had conquered star systems and subjugated entire species, looked at Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen and saw nothing more than a human child playing dress-up in adult clothing. But across the galaxy, in the shadow territories where pirates, slavers, and the worst of civilized society gathered, whispered legends spoke of a different truth. They called her the Ghost of Proxima, the Silent Death, and the Commander who never lose. To them, she wasn't a girl in a uniform. She was the nightmare that had cost them fleets, destroyed their operations, and turned their most secure strongholds into graveyards. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their determination, or even their capacity for violence. It was their ability to be underestimated by those who should have known better. And Sarah Chen was about to remind everyone why fear of humans wasn't just logical. It was survival. The council chamber of New Geneva stretched before them like a cathedral of chrome and crystal, its walls lined with holographic displays showing the current state of the galaxy's most troubled regions. Representatives from 47 different species sat in carefully arranged tiers, their various forms of breathing apparatus, translation devices, and environmental suits creating a symphony of mechanical hums and electronic chirps. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood at attention behind Admiral Morrison, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression neutral. At 24, she was the youngest human in the room by at least 15 years, and certainly the youngest officer present by several decades, when accounting for the various alien aging processes. Her uniform was impeccable but unremarkable, standard navy blue with silver trim, her rank insignia polished but not ostentatious. To most observers, she appeared to be exactly what her position suggested, a junior aide taking notes and carrying files for her superior. The Zephyrian representative, Ambassador Kethka, rose from his crystalline seat, his 6 arms spreading wide in a gesture of authority. His translator rendered his words in perfect standard galactic. The situation in the Outer Rim territories has reached a crisis point. 17 merchant vessels have been lost in the past month alone. The economic impact is becoming severe. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Outer Rim had always been problematic. A collection of frontier worlds, mining operations, and trading posts that existed at the very edge of civilized space. It was where the desperate went to start over, where corporations set up operations that wouldn't pass inspection in more regulated sectors, and where pirates found easy targets among ships traveling the long, lonely routes between systems. Admiral Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face grave. The situation is indeed serious, Ambassador, but I believe the Council may be underestimating the complexity of the problem we're facing. The hegemony's military coordinator, General Vax Prime, let out a sound that his translator interpreted as derisive laughter. The insectoid being's compound eyes glittered with amusement. Complexity? Admiral, we are discussing simple piracy. The solution is straightforward. Deploy sufficient force to eliminate the threat. Several species nodded in agreement. The Takari delegate, a massive reptilian creature whose species had conquered 12 star systems through brute force, slammed a clawed fist against his desk. The hegemony speaks wisdom. These criminals prey on weakness, show them strength, and they scatter like prey beasts before the predator. Sarah felt a familiar tension building in her shoulders. She had read the intelligence reports, studied the patterns, analyzed the data that the various military forces had been collecting for months. What they were dealing with wasn't simple piracy, it was something far more organized and dangerous. But she remained silent, knowing that her place in this gathering was to observe, not participate. Admiral Morrison tried again. With respect, General Vax Prime, our analysis suggests— Your analysis, interrupt the Syndicate's war leader, a cybernetically enhanced humanoid known as Iron Fist Korvac, has produced little results. Perhaps it is time for species with more decisive approaches to take the lead. The chamber erupted in competing voices, each species representative eager to demonstrate their superior tactical thinking. The Zephyrians advocated for massive show-of-force deployments. The hegemony wanted to carpet bomb suspected pirate bases. The Takari suggested hunting expeditions that would track down and eliminate pirate leadership through targeted assassination. The syndicate proposed deploying their cybernetic warriors to key strategic points. Through it all, Sarah noticed something that none of the loudly arguing aliens seemed to recognize. They were all approaching the problem as if they were dealing with traditional pirates, disorganized criminals who operated in small groups and fled at the first sign of serious opposition. But the attack pattern she had analyzed told a different story entirely. The timing of the attacks showed coordination across vast distances. The targets weren't chosen randomly, but followed a clear strategic pattern designed to disrupt specific trade routes and economic relationships. The pirates had access to military-grade equipment and intelligence that should have been impossible for common criminals to obtain. Most telling of all, they seemed to know exactly when and where to strike to cause maximum damage while avoiding the patrol routes and security deployments that the various galactic powers had established. This wasn't piracy. This was asymmetric warfare being conducted by someone who understood both military strategy and the political dynamics of the Galactic Council. Someone was using the pirates as proxies to destabilize the region, and they were succeeding because the Council's members were too focused on demonstrating their own superiority to recognize the real threat. The Korean delegate, a tall, graceful being whose species prided itself on diplomatic solutions, perhaps we should consider that military force alone may not be the complete solution. The pirates appear to have extensive knowledge of our patrol patterns and defensive positions. This suggests either exceptional reconnaissance capabilities or what? General Vax Prime demanded. Or someone is providing them with inside information. The chamber fell silent for a moment before erupting in even louder arguments. Accusations flew between species, old territorial disputes were dredged up, and several representatives began questioning each other's loyalty to the council. Sarah watched the chaos unfold with a mixture of fascination and frustration. They were so busy posturing and arguing that they were completely missing the obvious strategic implications of what the Korean had suggested. Ambassador Kethka eventually restored order by activating the chamber's sound dampening field, forcing everyone to communicate through their official translators. We cannot allow suspicion and mistrust to paralyze our response to this crisis. We need concrete solutions, not speculation about treachery. Agreed, said Iron Fist Korvac. I propose a joint task force. Each major power contributes ships and personnel. We sweep the Outer Rim systematically, destroy any pirates we encounter, and establish permanent patrol stations to prevent future incursions. The proposal gained support quickly. It was simple, direct, and allowed each species to demonstrate their military capabilities while sharing the costs and risks. Within minutes, they had outlined a basic operational structure. The hegemony would provide heavy assault vessels, the Takari would contribute their hunter-killer ships, the Syndicate would supply cybernetic boarding troops, and the Zephyrans would coordinate logistics with their superior supply ships. Admiral Morrison cleared his throat. The Terran Republic would be honored to participate in this joint operation. Of course, General Vax Prime said dismissively. Humans can provide support vessels. Your species has proven adequate at cargo transport and basic patrol duties. Several representatives made sounds that their translators interpreted as polite agreement. Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but her expression remained neutral. She had heard this attitude from alien species many times before. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 30 years earlier. Most species saw them as junior partners at best, useful for filling out numbers and handling mundane tasks, but not to be trusted with anything truly important. We would also like to contribute strategic planning resources, Admiral Morrison said. Lieutenant Commander Chen has extensive experience in anti-piracy operations and has developed some innovative approaches that might be valuable to the Joint Task Force. For the first time since the session began, several alien representatives actually looked at Sarah directly. What they saw clearly didn't impress them. The hegemony general's compound eyes focused on her for barely a second before dismissing her entirely. The Takari delegate let out a rumbling sound that might have been laughter. Iron Fist Korvac's cybernetic enhancements whirred as he scanned her, and his expression suggested that his systems had concluded she posed no threat whatsoever. How awful, Ambassador Kethka said with barely concealed condescension. Perhaps the young officer could assist with data compilation or communication coordination. Actually, Admiral Morrison said, his voice carrying a slight edge, Lieutenant Commander Chen has successfully planned and executed 17 anti-piracy operations in Terran space. Her strategic analysis of the current situation has identified several patterns that I believe warrant serious consideration. The chamber fell quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. Several representatives exchanged glances that clearly communicated their shared opinion. The humans were overreaching, trying to claim importance they hadn't earned. A few made subtle gestures that their translators didn't bother to interpret, but Sarah understood enough alien body language to recognize expressions of amusement and dismissal. General Vax Prime spoke first. "Admiral, we appreciate your enthusiasm for promoting your junior officers. However, this operation will require experienced leadership and proven tactical expertise. Perhaps your lieutenant commander could observe the planning sessions and learn from more seasoned military minds." The Takari delegate agreed with a series of clicking sounds. "The young female may benefit from witnessing proper strategic thinking. My species has been conducting anti-piracy operations for over 2 centuries, and with great success, I'm sure," Admiral Morrison replied smoothly. However, Lieutenant Commander Chen's approaches have proven remarkably effective against organized criminal networks that use unconventional tactics. The pirates we're dealing with aren't operating like the traditional raiders your species has encountered. Iron Fist Korvac leaned forward, his cybernetic implants gleaming under the chamber's lights.
Admiral Morrison, are you suggesting that this child has insights that have escaped the attention of military leaders with decades of combat experience?
Sarah felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes focused on her, most carrying expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly dismissive.
She had been in situations like this before, though rarely on such a large scale. The pattern was always the same. Her age, her gender, and her species combined to create assumptions about her capabilities that had very little to do with her actual record or qualifications. Admiral Morrison looked back at her, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes asking a silent question. She could speak up, present her analysis, and try to convince the council that their approach was fundamentally flawed. Or she could remain silent, let them proceed with their conventional strategy, and watch as they walked into a trap that she could see but they couldn't. She gave him the slightest nod, indicating that she understood the situation and was prepared for whatever came next. The Admiral turned back to the chamber. "I'm suggesting that effective military strategy requires looking beyond conventional assumptions. The pirates operating in the Outer Rim aren't behaving like traditional criminals, and responding to them with traditional methods may prove insufficient.
General Vax Prime's translator somehow managed to convey outrage.
"Are you questioning the military capabilities of the Council's member species? I'm questioning whether we fully understand what we're dealing with." Ambassador Kethka activated a privacy field around his section and consulted quickly with several other representatives. When the field dropped, his expression had hardened. "Admiral Morrison, the Council appreciates the Terran Republic's willingness to contribute to this operation. However, we cannot allow inexperience to complicate what is already a delicate situation requiring coordination between multiple sovereign powers." The dismissal was polite but absolute. Several other representatives made sounds of agreement, and Sarah could see the decision crystallizing in real time. The Joint Task Force would proceed according to conventional strategic thinking. Human participation would be limited to support roles. Her analysis and recommendations would be filed away and forgotten. Admiral Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he simply nodded. "Of course, Ambassador. The Terran Republic will support the joint operation in whatever capacity the Council deems appropriate." As the session moved on to discussing logistics and command structures, Sarah allowed herself a moment to study the various alien representatives. They were intelligent beings from advanced civilizations, many with centuries of military experience and sophisticated technological capabilities. But they were also products of their own cultures and assumptions, locked into ways of thinking that had served them well in the past but might not be adequate for the present situation. She thought about the intelligence reports she had analyzed, the pattern of attacks that showed clear strategic thinking and advanced coordination. Whoever was behind the piracy campaign understood the Council's likely response better than the Council understood the threat they were facing. They were counting on exactly this kind of conventional military reaction. Massive deployments of traditional forces using predictable tactics against targets that could simply fade away when threatened and reappear elsewhere when the heat died down. The Joint Task Force was going to fail, not because the individual species lacked military capability, but because they were fighting the wrong kind of war with the wrong kind of strategy. And when they failed, the pirates would grow bolder, the attacks would escalate, and the economic damage would spread throughout the galaxy. But there was another possibility. If the Council was determined to pursue their conventional approach, then someone else would need to take unconventional action. Someone who understood what they were really dealing with and was willing to act on that understanding without waiting for committee approval or diplomatic consensus. Sarah had spent the last 6 months developing a strategy specifically designed to counter the kind of coordinated asymmetric campaign that the pirates were conducting. It would require resources that she didn't have, authority that she hadn't been given, and support that the council had just made clear they wouldn't provide. But it would work, and if the council wasn't prepared to listen to her analysis, perhaps they would pay attention to her results. The session concluded with the formation of a joint military command structure headed by General Vax Prime, with coordination support from the other major powers. The humans were assigned to provide transport vessels and communication support for the main battle groups. Lieutenant Commander Chen was thanked for her service and invited to submit any relevant data for review by the Senior Planning Committee. As the various representatives filed out of the chamber, each surrounded by their own entourages and security details, Admiral Morrison approached Sarah with a carefully neutral expression. "That went about as well as expected," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "They're not going to listen." "No, they're not. The question is, what do we do about it?" Sarah looked out through the chamber's vast transparent dome at the starfield beyond, where cargo ships moved in carefully regulated patterns between orbital stations and planetary surfaces. Somewhere out in that darkness, pirates were planning their next attacks, confident that the galaxy's great powers would respond exactly as they had always responded to such threats. "We let them try their way first," she said finally, "and then we showed them ours." The Admiral studied her expression for a long moment. "That sounds like it could get complicated." "Yes, sir," Sarah agreed. "It probably will." As they walked out of the council chamber together, neither of them spoke about the fact that Sarah's methods had never failed to achieve their objectives, even when those methods required her to operate far outside normal military protocols. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never saw coming. And Sarah Chen had spent her entire career perfecting the art of being underestimated. 3 weeks after the Council's grand proclamation of their joint task force, Sarah stood in the observation deck of the TRS Meridian, watching General Vax Prime's fleet conduct what he called a decisive sweep of the Kepler sector. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the hegemony battle cruisers moving in perfect formation, their weapon systems primed, and their sensors scanning for any sign of pirate activity. They found nothing. "Sensor sweep complete, General," came the report over the comm channel. "No hostile contacts detected. Moving to grid section 77 Alpha." Sarah checked her tablet, cross-referencing the fleet's position with the intelligence data she had been collecting. The pirates had hit 3 different convoys in this sector over the past month, but they had done it during specific time windows when merchant traffic was heaviest and patrol coverage was lightest. The Joint Task Force was conducting their sweep at midday cycle, when pirates would never operate here, using active sensor protocols that would announce their presence to anyone within a dozen light-years. It was like trying to catch nocturnal predators by marching through the forest at noon with brass bands and floodlights. "Status report from Omega Squadron," the tactical officer announced. "They've completed their sweep of the Proxima commercial route."
No pirate activity detected.
Of course not,
Sarah thought.
The pirates had abandoned that route 2 weeks ago after their intelligence network, and she was increasingly certain they had informed them about the planned military operation.
They had shifted their operations to the less-traveled freight corridors that connected the outer mining worlds, routes that the Joint Task Force had classified as secondary priorities and wouldn't reach for another month. Admiral Morrison approached her position, his expression carefully neutral. They had been observing the joint operation for 3 weeks now, officially serving as liaison support, while actually documenting the systematic failure of conventional tactics against an unconventional enemy. "The Syndicate reports similar results from their sector," he said quietly. "No pirate contacts, no interdictions, no recoveries of stolen cargo." Sarah nodded without looking away from the viewport. "They're not finding pirates because there aren't any pirates in the areas they're searching. The Council seems to think that's a sign of success." General Vax Prime issued a statement yesterday claiming that their show of force has driven the criminal elements away from the major shipping lanes. "For now," Sarah agreed. "But look at the secondary traffic reports." The Admiral consulted his tablet, scrolling through the data that Sarah had compiled from commercial shipping databases, insurance claim filings, and civilian distress calls. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. While the major shipping routes remained quiet, attacks on smaller convoys and independent merchants had actually increased. The pirates hadn't been driven away. They had simply shifted their operations to targets that the Joint Task Force wasn't protecting. 17 more ships lost in the past week, Admiral Morrison observed, all in sectors that the task force classified as low priority. And all following the same operational pattern, Sarah added. Precise intelligence about cargo manifests, optimal timing for minimal security presence, and clean extraction before any response could arrive. This isn't opportunistic piracy, Admiral. This is economic warfare being conducted by someone who understands interstellar commerce better than the merchants themselves. A new voice cut through their conversation. Lieutenant Commander Chen? Sarah turned to see Captain Reyes, the Meridian's commanding officer, approaching with a data pad in his hand. His expression was troubled. Captain, she acknowledged, I've just received a priority communication from Terran Command. There's been another incident, but this one's different. A convoy was hit near the Titan Mining Consortium's primary facility. 3 ships lost, but there were survivors. Sarah felt a surge of interest. In all the previous attacks, the pirates had been careful to leave no witnesses. Either they had taken all crew members prisoner, or the ships had been destroyed completely. Survivors meant the possibility of actual intelligence about their attackers.
How many survivors?
Admiral Morrison asked. 43 crew members from the escort frigate TCS Defiant. They were picked up by a merchant vessel after drifting for 18 hours in emergency pods. They're being held at the Titan Facilities Medical Center. Sarah was already pulling up star charts on her tablet, calculating travel times and plotting the most efficient route to the Titan system. When did the attack occur? 26 hours ago. But here's the interesting part. The survivors report that the attackers weren't using standard pirate vessels. They were flying military-grade ships with advanced stealth capabilities and weapons that shouldn't be available to criminal organizations.
Admiral Morrison and Sarah exchanged glances.
This confirmed what she had suspected for weeks. The pirates were either a well-funded organization with access to military suppliers, or they were working with someone who had legitimate access to advanced military technology. I want to interview those survivors, Sarah said immediately. Captain Reyes nodded. I thought you might. Admiral Morrison, Terran Command, has authorized a detour to the Titan system. We can be there in 8 hours if we break off from the joint operation. Do it, the Admiral ordered. Send my compliments to General Vax Prime and inform him that we're responding to a developing situation that requires immediate attention. As the Meridian changed course and accelerated toward the Titan system, Sarah retreated to her quarters to prepare for the interviews. She had developed her own methods for extracting useful intelligence from witnesses, techniques that went beyond standard military debriefing procedures. Combat survivors often knew more than they realized, but the information was buried under trauma, confusion, and the natural tendency of the human mind to fill in gaps in memory with assumptions and expectations. The key was to help them remember what they had actually seen rather than what they thought they should have seen. 8 hours later, Sarah sat in a sterile medical facility on Titan Prime. Across from Commander Janet Okafor, the senior surviving officer from the TCS Defiant, the commander's left arm was in a regeneration sleeve and there were healing scars along her cheek where shrapnel had grazed her during the attack. But her eyes were clear and focused, and Sarah could tell that she was eager to provide whatever information might help catch the people who had killed her crewmates. Tell me about the first moment you realized you were under attack, Sarah said, her voice calm and non-threatening. Commander Okafor closed her eyes, concentrating. We were in standard escort formation, about 200,000 kilometers ahead of the cargo haulers. Our sensors showed nothing unusual. Empty space, normal background radiation, no ships within scanning range. What changed? The cargo hauler Prosperity started transmitting a distress signal. Captain Martinez reported that they were experiencing massive system failures. Power grid, navigation, life support, everything was going down simultaneously. Sarah made a note on her tablet, system failures that comprehensive didn't happen by accident, especially not on a well-maintained commercial vessel.
What was your response?
We altered course to assist, standard procedure for escort duties. But as soon as we moved toward Prosperity, our own system started malfunctioning. Not the same problems. Our weapons and sensors stayed online, but our engines began running inefficient cycles, and our navigation computer kept calculating incorrect trajectories. Almost like someone was selectively interfering with specific ship systems.
Exactly.
And that's when they appeared. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Tell me about they. Commander Okafor's expression tightened. 4 ships, emerging from what I can only describe as empty space. They weren't there on our sensors, and then suddenly they were, like they had been invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Can you describe the ships? That's the part that doesn't make sense. They weren't flying anything I recognized from standard pirate configurations. These look like military vessels, but not from any fleet I'm familiar with. Sleek design, advanced hull materials, weapon systems that belonged on battle cruisers, not raiding ships.
Sarah consulted her tablet, pulling up recognition files of various military and civilian vessel types.
Were they similar to anything in here? Commander Okafor scrolled through the images, stopping occasionally to study particular designs. After several minutes, she shook her head. None of these are exactly right, but... She paused, going back to a file showing Syndicate military vessels. The weapon placements are similar to this design, but the hull configuration is more like... She moved to another file showing hegemony ships, this one, and the engine signatures reminded me of Zephyrian propulsion systems. Sarah felt a cold realization settling in her stomach. Ships that combined design elements from multiple different species weren't something that pirates could acquire through normal criminal channels. That kind of hybrid technology suggested either massive resources and sophisticated engineering capabilities, or access to military development programs from multiple galactic powers. What happened during the actual attack? They didn't hail us. No demands for surrender, no requests for cargo manifests, no communication at all. They just opened fire with the kind of precision that suggested they had been studying our ships for a long time. They knew exactly where to hit us to disable our systems without destroying us completely. They wanted to capture your ships intact? More than that, they wanted to capture us intact. The attack patterns were designed to incapacitate our crews while leaving the vessels operational. Targeted electromagnetic pulses that disrupted our nervous systems, gas weapons that induced unconsciousness without permanent damage, boarding protocols that prioritized containment over elimination. Sarah made another note. Pirates interested only in cargo would have simply destroyed the escort and taken what they wanted from the merchant vessels. But these attackers had gone to considerable effort to capture both ships and crews without causing unnecessary casualties. That suggested they had specific plans for their prisoners. How did you and your crew escape? We didn't exactly. They kept us unconscious for most of the time, but I came to during what I think was a transfer operation. I was in some kind of holding cell, but I could hear conversations in the corridors outside. Could you understand what they were saying? Commander Okafor hesitated. That's the strange part. They were speaking standard galactic, but with accents I couldn't place. Not like any species I've encountered, but familiar somehow. And they were discussing our cargo manifest with the kind of detail that suggested they already knew exactly what we were carrying and where it was supposed to go. Inside information. Had to be. They knew our route, our escort protocols, our communication schedules, even the personal habits of individual crew members. One of them mentioned that Captain Martinez always ran a full system diagnostic at 060 hours, which is when they had planned to disable our ships. Sarah felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The attackers had military-grade equipment, inside knowledge of commercial shipping operations, and access to hybrid technology from multiple galactic species. They were conducting operations with strategic objectives rather than simple profit motives, and they were careful to avoid unnecessary casualties, which suggested they were following some kind of rules of engagement rather than operating as common criminals. Commander, I need you to think carefully about this next question. During the time you were conscious in their facility, did you see or hear anything that might indicate where you were being held? I'm not sure. The artificial gravity felt lighter than standard, which might mean we were on a small station or asteroid facility. The background noise included sounds that could have been mining equipment or industrial machinery. And she paused, concentrating. There were announcements over an internal communications system, but they were in a language I didn't recognize. Not standard galactic? No, something else entirely. But here's the thing. Some of my crew members have linguistics training, and they told me later that it sounded like a combination of different alien languages, almost like someone had created an artificial dialect that borrowed elements from multiple species. Sarah closed her tablet and leaned back in her chair. The picture that was emerging was unlike anything she had encountered in her previous anti-piracy operations. This wasn't a criminal organization at all. It was a sophisticated military or paramilitary group with resources that rivaled those of major galactic powers, operating under command structures that suggested formal training and disciplined objectives. One last question, Commander. How did you end up in the escape pods? For the first time during the interview, Commander Okafor smiled. That's the part that gives me hope we can catch these bastards. They made a mistake. What kind of mistake? They underestimated us. Their intelligence about human capabilities was incomplete. They knew our standard operating procedures and our ship specifications, but they didn't understand how humans respond to captivity. While they were focused on processing our cargo and integrating our ships into their fleet, my crew was working on an escape plan. Sarah leaned forward with interest. Tell me about the escape. Chief Petty Officer Williams discovered that their holding cells were designed for various alien physiologies but not specifically for humans. Our smaller average size meant we could access maintenance corridors that other species couldn't navigate, and their security protocols were built around preventing escape during transport, not extended containment.
So you fought your way out?
We didn't fight. We disappeared. 23 crew members slipped out through the maintenance system over a 6-hour period. We made our way to the docking bay, sabotaged several of their smaller ships, and got to the escape pods before they realized what was happening.
And they just let you go?
Commander Okafor's expression turned grim. They tried to stop us, but by then we were already in the pods and scattered across a wide area. They could have hunted us down, but something else was happening at their facility that required their immediate attention. What kind of something? An attack. While we were escaping, someone else was hitting their installation with heavy weapons, military-grade firepower, coordinated assault patterns, the kind of operation that requires significant planning and resources. Sarah felt a new puzzle piece click into place. Someone else was attacking the pirates? That's what it looked like. And whoever it was, they knew exactly where to find the pirate base and how to hit it effectively. The timing couldn't have been coincidental. It happened during the same window when we were attempting our escape, which suggests someone was monitoring the situation and chose that moment to strike.
Sarah stood up and walked to the small viewport that looked out over Titan Prime's industrial complex.
In the distance, massive mining machines worked around the clock to extract valuable minerals from the planet's surface. Their operations coordinated by computer systems that could process more information in an hour than a human mind could handle in a lifetime. But computers were only as good as the information they were given and the logic systems they were designed to follow. If someone understood those systems well enough, they could be manipulated, redirected, or even turned against their original purposes. Commander, thank you for your time. Your information has been extremely valuable. Will it help you catch them? Sarah turned back from the viewport. I believe it will, but probably not in the way you might expect. As she left the medical facility and returned to the Meridian, Sarah's mind was racing through the implications of what she had learned. The attacks weren't random piracy. They were part of a larger strategy designed to destabilize specific trade relationships and economic partnerships. The attackers had inside knowledge of commercial and military operations, suggesting either infiltration of multiple organizations or cooperation from someone with legitimate access to that information. Most importantly, they weren't operating alone. Someone else was hunting them. Someone with the resources and intelligence capabilities to track down their hidden installations and attack them with conventional military force. The galaxy wasn't dealing with a simple piracy problem. It was caught in the middle of a shadow war between two sophisticated opponents, and neither side was what they appeared to be. Sarah had spent her career learning to see patterns that others missed and understanding conflicts that weren't what they seemed on the surface. Now she was facing the most complex strategic puzzle of her life, and the stakes were potentially catastrophic. But for the first time since the Council had dismissed her analysis, she felt confident that she understood what she was dealing with. And understanding the enemy was always the first step toward defeating them. The question now was whether she could convince anyone else to listen before the Shadow War escalated into something that could tear the galaxy apart. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: shipping insurance claims. She had spent 3 days analyzing every piece of data from Commander Okafor's debriefing, cross-referencing it with attack patterns, fleet movements, and commercial traffic reports. The conventional approach would have been to focus on military intelligence, troop movements, weapons signatures, communication intercepts. But Sarah had learned long ago that the most revealing information often came from sources that everyone else overlooked. Insurance companies, it turned out, kept remarkably detailed records. "This doesn't make sense," muttered Lieutenant Torres, Sarah's intelligence analyst, as he stared at the holographic display floating above their makeshift command center aboard the Meridian. According to these claims, the pirates have stolen cargo worth approximately 47 billion credits over the past 6 months. "That's not the part that interests me," Sarah replied, manipulating the display to highlight specific data points. "Look at what they're stealing." The hologram shifted, organizing the stolen cargo by type and destination. Torres frowned as the pattern became clear. Rare earth minerals from the Kepler system, advanced electronics from the core worlds, medical supplies from the hegemony production facilities. It's not random, is it? Not even close. Every single item on this list is a component needed for large-scale military production. Someone is systematically acquiring the raw materials and manufactured goods necessary to build a fleet. Admiral Morrison joined them at the display, his expression troubled. The quantities are substantial. Based on these numbers, they could be constructing anywhere from 50 to 100 military vessels. Sarah nodded grimly. But here's the really interesting part. She manipulated the display again, adding shipping route data and attack timings. The thefts are being coordinated to disrupt specific trade relationships between council member species. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once Sarah pointed it out. The pirates weren't just stealing valuable cargo. They were targeting shipments that represented critical trade agreements between different galactic powers, medical supplies that the hegemony was providing to human colonies, rare minerals that the Zephyrians were trading to the Takari in exchange for manufactured goods, electronics that formed the backbone of communication networks between allied species. They're trying to undermine the Council's economic unity, Admiral Morrison realized.
More than that, Sarah said.
They're creating the conditions for member species to start questioning each other's reliability and commitment to mutual defense agreements. When the hegemony can't deliver promised medical supplies because their convoys keep getting hit, human colonies start wondering if their alliance is worth maintaining. When Zephyrian shipments to Takari space get intercepted repeatedly, both species start suspecting the other of providing intelligence to pirates. Lieutenant Torres was running calculations on his tablet. At this rate, several major trade agreements will become economically unsustainable within the next 3 months. The Council's members will start withdrawing from mutual defense pacts to focus on protecting their own shipping. Sarah had seen this strategy before, though never on such a massive scale. It was a classical approach to asymmetric warfare. Attack the enemy's ability to maintain alliances and coordinate responses, then exploit the resulting chaos to achieve objectives that would be impossible against a united opposition. But the sophistication required to plan and execute this kind of campaign suggested resources and intelligence capabilities that should have been beyond any criminal organization, which brought her back to the question that had been bothering her since the beginning. Who was really behind this? Admiral, she said, I need permission to conduct a reconnaissance mission. What kind of reconnaissance? Sarah called up a star chart showing the outer edge of explored space, where the pirate attacks had been concentrated. The survivors from the Defiant mentioned being held at a facility that sounded like a mining operation or industrial complex. Commander Okafor described the sound of heavy machinery and announcements in an artificial language. There are hundreds of mining operations in that region, but only a few that would have the infrastructure necessary to support large-scale military production. Sarah highlighted several systems on the chart. These locations have the right combination of mineral resources, industrial capacity, and isolation from regular patrol routes. If someone wanted to build a secret fleet, these would be the logical places to do it. Admiral Morrison studied the chart for several minutes. The Joint Task Force is scheduled to sweep through that region in 2 weeks as part of their systematic search pattern. By then, it might be too late. If the pirates realize that we're getting close to understanding their real objectives, they'll accelerate their timeline and launch whatever operation they've been preparing for. And if you're wrong about the location, Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then we waste a few days of travel time. But if I'm right and we don't act, the Council is going to face a coordinated attack by a fleet they don't know exists, using intelligence they don't know has been compromised, at a time and place of the enemy's choosing. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks of unauthorized action against the potential consequences of inaction. Finally, he nodded. Take a small team and investigate. But if you encounter opposition, your orders are to withdraw immediately and report back. We cannot afford to lose our intelligence advantage by alerting the enemy to our suspicions. Understood, sir. 6 hours later, Sarah stood in the cargo bay of the TRS Nightingale, a light reconnaissance vessel that had been retrofitted for stealth operations. The ship was small enough to avoid detection by most sensor arrays, fast enough to escape from pursuit, and equipped with advanced surveillance equipment that could gather detailed intelligence from long range. Her team consisted of 3 specialists. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a former Special Operations officer with extensive experience in covert reconnaissance. Chief Petty Officer Kim, whose technical expertise with alien computer systems had proven invaluable in previous operations. And Dr. Reina Santos, a xenoarchaeologist whose knowledge of alien industrial processes might help them understand what they were looking at. First target is the Hadley system, Sarah announced as the Nightingale entered hyperspace. Long-range sensors detect significant industrial activity around the 4th planet, but it's not showing up in any official mining consortium databases. Commander Jackson consulted his tactical display. How do we approach without being detected? We'll drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and use passive sensors to gather initial intelligence. If the facility is what I think it is, They'll have detection networks that can identify approaching ships at considerable distance. The 3-day journey to the Hadley system gave Sarah time to refine her analysis and prepare for what they might find. The more she studied the intelligence data, the more convinced she became that the galaxy was dealing with something unprecedented. A military operation disguised as criminal activity, conducted by an organization with resources that rivaled those of major galactic powers. But who could mount such an operation? The Council's member species were accounted for, their fleets and resources monitored through mutual defense agreements. Rogue elements within those species might have access to limited military assets, but nothing on the scale suggested by the evidence, which meant they were either dealing with a previously unknown species with advanced military capabilities, or someone within the Council itself was orchestrating the attacks for their own purposes. The Nightingale dropped out of hyperspace at the outer edge of the Hadley system, its stealth systems immediately engaging to minimize their sensor signature. Sarah moved to the sensor station and began a careful scan of the inner system, looking for signs of the industrial activity that had been detected by long-range surveillance. What she found exceeded her worst expectations. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Santos, staring at the tactical display. "How many ships are there?" The fourth planet of the Hadley system was surrounded by a massive construction complex that extended from orbital stations down to the planet's surface. Hundreds of vessels in various stages of completion floated in organized formations around automated shipyards, their designs immediately recognizable as military specifications despite their unfamiliar configurations. Chief Kim was running analysis programs on his computer. I count at least 200 vessels, ranging from Corvette-class to battlecruiser specifications. The construction techniques appear to be combining design elements from multiple different species. Sarah felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. This wasn't just a secret fleet. It was the largest military construction project she had ever seen, and it was being conducted entirely outside the knowledge or oversight of any galactic authority. "Commander Jackson, can you identify any security measures around the construction complex? Multiple sensor networks, automated defense platforms, and patrol ships conducting regular sweeps of the surrounding area. They're definitely expecting someone to come looking for them." Dr. Santos was studying the industrial facilities on the planet's surface. The ground installations appear to be processing raw materials and manufacturing components for military systems. Based on the scale of the operations, this complex has been under construction for several years. Sarah thought about the timeline of the pirate attacks, the systematic acquisition of specific materials and components, the careful coordination required to disrupt Council trade relationships without triggering a unified military response. This operation had been planned and executed over a period that suggested incredible patience and strategic thinking. "Can we identify who's running this operation?" Sarah asked. Chief Kim had been working on intercepting communication signals from the complex. His expression was troubled as he looked up from his console. "That's the problem, Commander. I'm detecting communication protocols from at least 6 different species, but they're all being coordinated through a central command structure that I can't identify." "What do you mean?" The technical specifications for the ships under construction include design elements from Hegemony, Takari, Syndicate, Zephyrian, and even human engineering systems. But they're being integrated in ways that suggest someone has access to classified military development data from all those species. Sarah felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. It's not one species conducting this operation. It's a coalition. The implications were staggering. Someone had managed to convince representatives from multiple Council species to participate in a secret military project that involved systematic attacks on their own allies' shipping. Either there was a faction within each species that was working against their official governments, or the governments themselves were involved in a conspiracy that made their public cooperation in the Council a deliberate deception. "Commander," Lieutenant Commander Jackson said urgently, "we're being scanned. Someone's detected our presence." Sarah moved quickly to the tactical station. The display showed 3 fast attack vessels moving toward their position from the construction complex, their approach vectors designed to cut off possible escape routes. "Evasive maneuvers. Get us back to the hyperspace jump point." The Nightingale accelerated away from the Hadley system's inner planets, its engines straining to reach escape velocity before the pursuit ships could intercept them. Sarah watched the tactical display as the gap between them and their pursuers slowly decreased, the enemy vessels demonstrating speed and maneuverability that confirmed her assessment of their military-grade capabilities. 30 seconds to hyperspace transition, the pilot announced. The pursuing ships opened fire with weapons that painted brilliant streams of energy across the darkness between them and the Nightingale. The shots were precise enough to demonstrate that they could have destroyed the reconnaissance vessel if they had chosen to, but instead they seemed designed to disable rather than eliminate. Just like the attacks on commercial shipping, Sarah realized, they wanted to capture rather than destroy, which suggested they were still trying to maintain the secrecy of their operation. The Nightingale jumped to hyperspace just as the pursuing vessels reached weapons range, leaving the mysterious construction complex behind. But Sarah had seen enough to understand the true scope of the threat facing the galaxy. During the 3-day journey back to rendezvous with the main fleet, she worked with her team to compile a comprehensive intelligence report that documented everything they had observed. The secret fleet, the multi-species cooperation, the systematic acquisition of military resources, the strategic disruption of Council trade relationships. It all pointed to a coordinated campaign that was preparing for something much larger than simple piracy. What do you think their ultimate objective is? Dr. Santos asked as they reviewed the final report. Sarah looked out at the stars streaming past the Nightingale's viewports. I think they're planning to destroy the Council entirely. The piracy campaign is designed to weaken economic cooperation and mutual defense agreements between member species. Once those relationships break down, the member species will be isolated and vulnerable to individual attack. But why? The Council represents the greatest period of peace and prosperity in galactic history. For some species, yes, but not for all of them. There are probably factions within each member species that believe their interests would be better served by a different kind of galactic order. And there might be species that were excluded from the Council entirely who see this as their opportunity to claim a position of power. Commander Jackson was studying tactical projections on his display. Based on the size of the fleet we observed, they have the capability to challenge any individual Council species. But could they take on the entire Council if the member species remained united? That's why the piracy campaign is so important to their strategy. They're not trying to defeat the Council militarily while it's united. They're trying to break it apart first, then defeat the individual pieces while they're isolated and distrustful of each other. Sarah thought about the Council session where her analysis had been dismissed, the joint task force that was conducting ineffective sweeps of empty space while the real threat prepared for action in secret installations, the various species representatives who had been so confident in their conventional approaches to military problems. The enemy understood the Council's weaknesses better than the Council understood them itself. They had identified the political and psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited to turn the galaxy's greatest powers against each other, and they were executing a strategy designed to achieve their objectives without ever having to face the full combined might of the Council's military forces. But they had made one critical error. They had dismissed the young woman in the uniform as irrelevant to their plans. Sarah had been underestimated before by enemies who thought they understood human capabilities and limitations. Those enemies had learned, usually too late, that their assumptions about humans were incomplete. The galaxy was about to learn the same lesson. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the same chamber where Sarah had been dismissed 6 weeks earlier. But this time, the atmosphere was markedly different. Instead of confident representatives discussing routine military operations, the assembled delegates carried themselves with the tension of beings who had suddenly realized they were facing an existential threat. Admiral Morrison stood before the Council with Sarah beside him, no longer relegated to the background as a silent observer. The intelligence they had gathered from the Hadley System reconnaissance mission had forced even the most dismissive Council members to acknowledge that their conventional approach to the piracy problem had been fundamentally flawed. The facility we observed represents the largest secret military construction project in recorded galactic history, Admiral Morrison reported. Conservative estimates suggest a fleet of over 200 military vessels, incorporating advanced technology from multiple species, with industrial capacity to support extended combat. General Vax Prime's compound eyes were fixed on the holographic display showing images from the Nightingale's reconnaissance mission. His translator rendered his words with unusual emotion. This is impossible. Such a construction project would require resources and coordination beyond the capabilities of any known criminal organization. That's correct, General, Sarah said, speaking for the first time during an official council session. Because we're not dealing with criminals. The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Kefka leaned forward in his crystalline seat. Explain. Sarah activated the main display, which showed a comprehensive analysis of the pirate attacks organized by target, timing, and strategic outcome. The attacks on commercial shipping were never intended to generate profit through theft. They were designed to systematically undermine trade relationships between Council member species, while acquiring specific materials needed for military production. You're suggesting this is economic warfare, asked the Korean delegate. Economic warfare is one component of a larger strategy. The ultimate objective appears to be the dissolution of the Council as a unified political and military entity. Iron Fist Korvac's cybernetic enhancements whirred as he processed this information. If that were true, the perpetrators would need detailed intelligence about Council operations, trade agreements, and military capabilities. The level of inside knowledge required would be... He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the chamber understood the implication. Sarah waited a moment for the realization to settle before continuing. The fleet under construction at Hadley incorporates design elements from hegemony battle cruisers, Takari hunter-killers, Syndicate assault ships, Zephyrian logistics vessels, and human reconnaissance platforms. This level of technological integration suggests access to classified military specifications from every major Council species. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Representatives began looking at each other with expressions that ranged from suspicion to outright hostility. The unity that had held the Council together for decades was beginning to fracture under the weight of implied betrayal. General Vax Prime was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Are you suggesting that Council members are collaborating with these attackers? I'm suggesting that someone with access to our highest levels of military and political intelligence is providing information to an organization that is preparing to attack us, Sarah replied carefully. Whether that represents collaboration or infiltration is something we need to determine quickly. Ambassador Kethka activated privacy fields around his section and consulted urgently with his staff. Similar conversations were occurring throughout the chamber as each delegation tried to assess the implications of Sarah's intelligence report for their own security and political position. The Takari delegate, however, had a different reaction. Instead of fear or suspicion, his expression showed what Sarah recognized as predatory interest. Lieutenant Commander Chen, you have presented compelling evidence of a significant threat to Council security. What do you recommend we do about it? Sarah had been preparing for this question since the Nightingale's return from the reconnaissance mission. The conventional military response would be to mobilize the Joint Task Force and launch an immediate attack on the Hadley facility before the secret fleet could become operational. But conventional responses were exactly what their opponents were expecting. I recommend we allow them to make the first move. The chamber erupted in shocked protests. Several representatives began speaking simultaneously, their translators creating a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. General Vax Prime's compound eyes focused on Sarah with what could only be described as incredulous anger. You want us to wait for them to attack, he demanded. I want us to control when and where they attack, Sarah clarified. The enemy's strategy depends on the Council remaining divided and reactive. They're counting on us to respond to their provocations in predictable ways that will further undermine our unity and effectiveness. Iron Fist Korvac leaned forward. What kind of control are you suggesting? Sarah activated a new display showing star charts of the Outer Rim territories. We provide them with an irresistible target that appears vulnerable, but is actually a carefully prepared trap. When they take the bait, we'll be ready for them with superior intelligence, coordinated tactics, and the advantage of choosing our battlefield. The Korean delegate raised a tentacle. This assumes we can predict their behavior accurately. What if your assessment of their strategy is incorrect? Then we'll face the same attack we would have faced anyway, but we'll meet it on our terms instead of theirs. Admiral Morrison stepped forward to support Sarah's proposal. The lieutenant commander's track record in anti-piracy operations is perfect. Her strategic assessments have consistently proven accurate, and her tactical innovations have resolved conflicts that conventional approaches failed to address. Sarah appreciated the admiral's support, but she could see that several council members remained skeptical. They were being asked to trust the judgment of someone they had dismissed as irrelevant just weeks earlier and to adopt a strategy that went against every military instinct they possessed. Ambassador Kethka was the first to ask the critical question. What kind of target would be irresistible enough to draw out their entire fleet? Sarah had anticipated this question as well. A joint council summit on economic cooperation, held at a space station in the Outer Rim territories. We announced that the major species are meeting to discuss new trade agreements and mutual defense pacts specifically designed to counter the piracy threat. You want to use our own political leadership as bait? The Takari delegate's translators somehow managed to convey astonishment. I want to use the appearance of our political leadership as bait. The actual summit would be conducted remotely, with holographic duplicates representing each species, while the real delegates remain safely in council space. General Vax Prime was studying tactical projections on his personal display. Even if we could convince them to attack such a target, we would need to position significant military forces in the area without alerting their intelligence network to our presence. That's where the enemy's greatest advantage becomes their greatest weakness. Sarah explained. They have inside knowledge of our standard operational procedures, but they don't understand how humans adapt those procedures when we know we're being watched. She activated another display showing fleet deployment patterns. We announce a standard defensive deployment using conventional council tactics, but the actual defensive force will be positioned using human stealth techniques and deception protocols that their intelligence sources won't recognize. Dr. Santos, who had been quietly analyzing the data from their reconnaissance mission, spoke up from her position in the observation gallery. Commander Chen, the scale of the fleet we observed at Hadley suggests they're prepared for a major engagement. Are you confident that even a well-prepared trap can defeat such a force? Sarah looked up at the xenoarchaeologist with a slight smile. Dr. Santos, what did you conclude about the construction timeline for their fleet? Based on the industrial infrastructure and construction techniques, I estimated that the project has been underway for approximately 4 years. And how long would it take to complete? At their current rate of production, perhaps 6 more months for the remaining vessels to become fully operational. Sarah turned back to the council representatives. They've been working on this project for 4 years, but they're not finished yet. That means they're operating under time pressure to achieve their objectives before their fleet is ready for extended combat operations. Explain the significance, demanded Iron Fist Korvac. They need to break up the council and eliminate our ability to coordinate a unified response before their industrial capacity becomes vulnerable to counterattack. If we can force them to engage us prematurely, with an incomplete fleet and limited logistical support, we can defeat them decisively. Admiral Morrison nodded approvingly. The lieutenant commander is correct. Our intelligence advantage lies not just in knowing about their fleet, but in understanding their operational timeline and strategic constraints. The chamber fell quiet as the council members absorbed this analysis. Sarah could see the shift in their expressions as they began to understand that she wasn't just proposing a different tactical approach. She was offering them a path to victory that their opponents hadn't anticipated. Ambassador Keth Ka was the first to speak. The strategy requires precise coordination and absolute trust between council members. Given the possibility of infiltration or collaboration that you've raised, how can we ensure operational security? Sarah had been expecting this question as well. We compartmentalize the operation. Each species contributes forces and intelligence according to their capabilities, but no single species has complete knowledge of the overall plan. The coordination comes from a small command group with representatives from each major power, operating under protocols that prevent any individual from compromising the entire operation. And who would lead this command group? Asked General Vax Prime. Sarah met his compound gaze steadily. Someone who has proven capable of analyzing unconventional threats and developing effective countermeasures. Someone who understands both our capabilities and our weaknesses better than our enemies do. The implication was clear, but Sarah didn't presume to nominate herself directly. That decision would have to come from the council members themselves, based on their assessment of her qualifications and their willingness to trust her judgment. The Takari delegate was the first to voice support. The human female has demonstrated superior strategic thinking and accurate threat assessment. Her species' reputation for adaptability and unconventional tactics may provide advantages that our enemies have not anticipated.
I agree, said the Korean representative.
Lieutenant Commander Chen's analysis has proven more accurate than our combined intelligence services. Perhaps it is time to acknowledge that conventional approaches are insufficient for unconventional threats. Iron Fist Korvac's cybernetic systems processed this information before he responded. The Syndicate supports placing operational command under someone with proven expertise in asymmetric warfare. Our survival may depend on thinking differently than our enemies expect. General Vax Prime was the last to agree, his compound eyes studying Sarah with what she interpreted as grudging respect. The hegemony will support this approach, with the understanding that success will require unprecedented cooperation between species with different military cultures and tactical preferences. Ambassador Kethka looked around the chamber, taking the measure of his colleagues' expressions. Very well, the Council authorizes the development of an integrated defense strategy under the coordination of Lieutenant Commander Chen, with operational support from designated representatives of each major power. As the session concluded and the various delegations began filing out of the chamber, Sarah found herself at the center of a situation she had never anticipated. 6 weeks earlier, she had been dismissed as irrelevant to galactic security. Now she was being asked to coordinate the largest joint military operation in Council history, against an enemy whose true capabilities and objectives were still largely unknown. But as she watched the alien representatives discussing logistics and tactical requirements with their staffs, Sarah felt a familiar confidence settling over her. She had spent her entire career preparing for challenges that seemed impossible to conventional military thinking. The enemy had made the mistake of assuming that the Council's response would follow predictable patterns based on historical precedent. They were about to learn that humans excelled at rewriting the rules when the old rules were no longer sufficient. The galaxy's greatest military minds had finally decided to listen to the girl in the uniform. Now it was time to show them why fear of humans wasn't just logical, it was the key to survival. The Meridian Prime space station hung in the darkness between stars like a monument to galactic cooperation, its massive structure bristling with communication arrays, docking bays, and the kind of advanced defensive systems that made it seem impregnable. To anyone monitoring Council communications, it appeared to be hosting the most important diplomatic gathering in decades, an emergency summit where the major species would forge new economic alliances and military partnerships to counter the growing piracy threat. In reality, the station was bait in the most sophisticated trap ever conceived by the Galactic Council. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood in the station's command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of over 300 ships from 6 different species. But these displays told only part of the story. The real defensive force was invisible to conventional sensors, hidden throughout the surrounding space using stealth technologies and deployment patterns that no enemy intelligence network could have anticipated. Status report from Ghost Squadron, came the voice of Commander Jackson through her earpiece. All human stealth ships are in position and maintaining sensor silence. Acknowledged. Hegemony units? General Vax Prime's compound eyes were focused on his tactical display as he responded through the joint communication network. Battle Group 7 is ready. Our ships are powered down and drifting in the asteroid field as planned. Sensors will interpret us as space debris until we activate our engines. 3 hours until the fake summit was scheduled to begin, which meant their enemies would need to begin their approach soon if they intended to strike during the opening ceremonies. The intelligence network that had been providing them with Council operational information would have told them that security would be focused on protecting the diplomatic proceedings rather than defending against a major fleet action. Takari Hunter Pax report ready, added the Takari military coordinator. We are positioned along the expected approach vectors, prepared to prevent enemy retreat. Sarah had spent 2 weeks coordinating this operation, working with species that had never attempted such a complex joint maneuver. Each group of ships was positioned according to their tactical specializations. The Hegemony's heavy battlecruisers would provide the primary offensive punch. The Takari's fast attack ships would cut off escape routes. The Syndicate's cybernetic warriors would board and capture enemy vessels. The Zephyrians would coordinate logistics and communications, and the humans would provide intelligence and adaptive tactical support. But the most important element of the trap wasn't military hardware. It was psychological. The enemy believed they understood Council capabilities and limitations. They had planned their attack based on assumptions about how the various species would respond to threats and coordinate their defenses. Sarah's strategy was designed to violate every one of those assumptions. Contact, announced Chief Kim from the sensor station. Multiple ships emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. Configuration matches the vessels we observed at the Hadley facility. Sarah moved to the tactical display, watching as red icons representing enemy ships appeared in formations that confirmed her analysis of their strategic thinking. The attacking fleet was approaching in 3 waves: an advance force to probe defenses, a main assault group to overwhelm the station's protective systems, and a reserve force to exploit any breakthrough and complete the capture of the diplomatic targets. It was a sound plan that would have worked perfectly against a conventionally defended target. Unfortunately for them, there was nothing conventional about what they were about to encounter. Enemy fleet composition, Sarah requested. 67 vessels in the first wave, including battle cruisers, assault ships, and support craft. Second wave shows 93 ships in heavy assault configuration. Third wave. Dear God, there are over 150 ships in the reserve force. Over 300 enemy vessels. Sarah felt a momentary flutter of anxiety as she realized the true scale of the threat they were facing. The secret fleet was even larger than their reconnaissance had suggested, representing military power that could challenge any individual Council species in direct combat. But she had planned for this contingency. The trap was designed to work regardless of the enemy's numerical superiority, because it wasn't based on matching firepower with firepower. It was based on controlling the enemy's decision-making process and forcing them to fight the kind of battle they weren't prepared for. All units, maintain position and sensor silence, Sarah ordered. Let them commit to their attack pattern before we reveal our presence. The first enemy wave approached Meridian Prime cautiously, their sensors scanning for defensive installations and fleet deployments. What they found matched their intelligence reports exactly: a standard Council protective formation with predictable ship positions and conventional defensive protocols. "They're taking the bait," observed Iron Fist Korvac, his cybernetic enhancements analyzing the enemy approach vectors. "Their formation suggests they believe they're facing routine station defenses." Sarah watched the tactical display as the enemy fleet moved into attack position. The first wave would engage the visible defenders and assess their capabilities. The second wave would exploit any weaknesses and overwhelm the station's defenses. The third wave would move in to capture the facility and secure the diplomatic targets. It was exactly the kind of methodical, overwhelming assault that had made their piracy campaign so successful. But piracy and fleet combat required different tactical approaches, and their intelligence sources had provided them with information about Council defensive doctrine that was about to prove dangerously outdated. "First wave entering weapons range," reported the tactical officer. "They're powering up weapons and targeting our decoy fleet." The decoy fleet consisted of automated platforms designed to mimic the sensor signatures and communication patterns of actual Council vessels. From the enemy's perspective, they were engaging a standard defensive force that was responding exactly as Council doctrine predicted. The deception would hold until the moment Sarah chose to reveal the trap. Second wave accelerating toward the station. "They're moving to assault formation." Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her during critical tactical moments. Everything depended on timing now. Reveal the trap too early, and the enemy could retreat to hyperspace and attempt the attack elsewhere. Wait too long, and they might actually damage the station, or discover that the diplomatic summit was a deception. But there was a third consideration that made this moment even more critical. The enemy fleet represented years of construction and resource allocation by whoever was behind the conspiracy against the Council. If they could capture or destroy a significant portion of that fleet, they would cripple their opponent's ability to mount similar operations in the future. Sarah wanted all of them. Third wave moving to support position. All enemy vessels are now committed to the attack. Perfect. The entire enemy fleet was inside the sensor network that the Council forces have established around the system. No matter what happened next, none of them would escape without fighting their way through multiple layers of carefully positioned defenders. "Execute Revelation Protocol," Sarah ordered. The darkness around Meridian Prime suddenly blazed with light as 300 Council ships activated their engines and weapons simultaneously. The hegemony battlecruisers emerged from the asteroid field, with their heavy guns already targeting enemy command ships. Takari hunter packs materialized along the enemy flanks, cutting off retreat routes with precise positioning that turned the system into a cage. Syndicate assault ships decloaked directly behind the enemy formation, their boarding craft already launching toward high-value targets. But the most devastating surprise came from the human stealth ships that had been hiding in the system's outer darkness. Ghost Squadron emerged from sensor silence in perfect position to attack the enemy's logistics vessels and command ships, striking at the fleet's ability to coordinate and sustain combat operations. "Enemy fleet is attempting to regroup," reported Chief Kim, "but they're completely out of position for the kind of battle they're now facing." Sarah watched the tactical display as confusion rippled through the enemy formation. They had prepared for a conventional assault on a fixed target, but instead found themselves surrounded by a mobile defense that was attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Their superior numbers meant nothing when they couldn't bring their firepower to bear effectively. Hegemony units, focus fire on their battle cruisers. Dakari forces prevent any ships from reaching hyperspace jump distance. Syndicate troops prioritize capturing their command vessels intact. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of the massive ship-to-ship duels that characterized traditional fleet engagements, it became a complex dance of coordinated attacks that prevented the enemy from establishing any coherent tactical response. The hegemony's heavy weapons systematically eliminated enemy capital ships before they could organize effective counterattacks. The Takari hunter packs used their superior speed and maneuverability to disable enemy engines and weapon systems, turning dangerous opponents into helpless targets. The Syndicate's cybernetic warriors boarded enemy vessels and took control of their computer systems, using the ship's own defensive systems against their crews. And throughout the battle, human commanders provided real-time tactical coordination that adapted to changing conditions faster than any enemy could counter. When the enemy tried to concentrate their remaining forces for a breakthrough attempt, the Council fleet shifted positions to maintain their tactical advantage. When enemy ships attempted to escape individually, they found their routes blocked by precisely positioned interceptors. "Enemy command ship is attempting to surrender," reported Iron Fist Korvac from his assault vessel. "My boarding teams have secured their bridge and captured their senior officers." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. The command ship would contain intelligence about the conspiracy's leadership, objectives, and remaining capabilities. But more importantly, its capture would leave the remaining enemy forces without unified command structure. Accept their surrender and secure all personnel for interrogation. Continue engagement with remaining hostile forces. The battle continued for another 3 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt after the initial surprise. The enemy fleet had been designed for overwhelming assault operations against unprepared targets, not for sustained combat against coordinated opposition that controlled the tactical situation. By the time the last enemy ship either surrendered or was destroyed, the Council forces had achieved a victory that surpassed Sarah's most optimistic projections. Over 200 enemy vessels had been captured or eliminated, along with their crews, equipment, and intelligence materials. The secret fleet that had taken 4 years to construct had been effectively destroyed in a single engagement. But the most significant victory wasn't military, it was political. The successful cooperation between Council species during the battle had demonstrated that their unity was stronger than their enemies had calculated. The conspiracy had been based on the assumption that the Council members would remain divided and reactive in the face of systematic attacks. Instead, they had proven capable of unprecedented coordination and tactical innovation. "Final casualty reports," requested Sarah as the tactical situation stabilized. "Council forces, 17 ships damaged, none destroyed, casualty count under 200 across all species," Admiral Morrison reported. "Enemy forces, 234 ships captured or destroyed. Estimated casualties over 40,000. It was the most one-sided victory in modern galactic warfare, achieved not through superior firepower, but through superior strategy and coordination." Sarah had proven that understanding the enemy's psychology and decision-making process was more valuable than matching their material capabilities. As the various Council fleets began organizing captured enemy vessels for transport to secure facilities, Sarah found herself alone in the command center for the first time in days. The holographic display still showed ship positions and tactical data, but the crisis atmosphere had been replaced by the methodical process of analyzing intelligence and planning follow-up operations. She thought about the Council session where she had been dismissed as irrelevant. The alien representatives who had seen nothing more than a young woman in a uniform playing at military strategy. They had learned the same lesson that pirates, slavers, and criminal organizations throughout the galaxy had already learned the hard way. Humans were dangerous not because they were stronger or more technologically advanced than their enemies, but because they excelled at being underestimated. And Sarah Chen had just demonstrated why that talent for deception was humanity's greatest strategic asset. 3 days later, Sarah stood before the Galactic Council once again, but this time the atmosphere in the chamber was markedly different. Instead of dismissive skepticism, she faced expressions of respectful attention from beings who had witnessed the effectiveness of human strategic thinking firsthand. The intelligence extracted from captured enemy personnel had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy against the Council. It involved rogue factions from multiple species who believed that the current galactic order limited their potential for expansion and dominance. They had spent years infiltrating Council institutions, stealing military technology, and building a secret alliance designed to shatter interspecies cooperation and replace it with a new hierarchy based on military conquest. But their most critical error had been their assumption that the Council's response would follow predictable patterns based on historical precedent and species-specific tactical doctrines. They had prepared for every conventional military strategy except the one that Sarah had actually employed. "The threat to Council security has been eliminated," Sarah reported to the assembled representatives. "The captured intelligence indicates that this was the only major military force available to the conspiracy. However, the political networks that supported this operation may still be active within our respective governments." Ambassador Kefka leaned forward with interest. "What do you recommend to address this internal security threat?" "Continued cooperation between Council species in intelligence sharing and counter-infiltration operations. The conspiracy succeeded as long as our respective security services operated independently and shared minimal information. Their defeat required unprecedented coordination between species with different capabilities and operational methods." General Vax Prime, who had been one of Sarah's strongest critics during the initial Council session, now addressed her with obvious respect. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, your strategic innovations during this operation have proven remarkably effective. Would you be willing to share these techniques with other Council military leaders?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The human approach to asymmetric warfare was based on cultural attitudes and psychological factors that were difficult to translate directly to other species. But the underlying principles, understanding enemy assumptions, controlling tactical timing, coordinating diverse capabilities toward unified objectives, were applicable to any military situation. "I would be honored to participate in joint strategic planning and tactical development programs. However, I should note that the most effective approaches often involve techniques that appear unconventional or even counterintuitive to traditional military thinking, such as using our own leadership as bait, asked the Takari delegate, with what Sarah had learned to recognize as amusement, such as turning the enemy's intelligence advantages into weaknesses by providing them with accurate information that leads them to make incorrect tactical decisions. Iron Fist Korvac's cybernetic systems word as he processed this concept. You deliberately allowed them to know our standard defensive procedures so that they would prepare for the wrong kind of battle. I allowed them to believe that we would respond according to their assumptions about our limitations and conventional thinking. Their entire strategy was based on the premise that council species could not achieve effective coordination or tactical innovation under pressure. The Korean delegate raised a tentacle thoughtfully. Your success suggests that our enemy's greatest error was underestimating not just human capabilities, but the potential for all council species to transcend their traditional approaches to warfare. Sarah nodded. The conspiracy failed because it was based on static assumptions about dynamic opponents. They spent years studying our historical patterns without considering our capacity for adaptation and growth. As the session continued, and the council members discussed plans for enhanced security cooperation and joint military training programs, Sarah reflected on the broader implications of what had occurred. The defeat of the secret fleet had eliminated an immediate threat to galactic stability, but it had also demonstrated something more important. The Council's member species were capable of unprecedented cooperation when they were willing to trust each other's capabilities and expertise. The young woman who had been dismissed as irrelevant had become the focal point for a new kind of interspecies military relationship, one based on mutual respect for different approaches to strategic thinking rather than competition over whose methods were superior. But Sarah also understood that this victory had established a reputation that would follow her throughout her career. Across the galaxy, in meeting rooms and command centers where beings planned operations that required unconventional thinking, they would remember the human officer who had seen patterns that everyone else had missed and coordinated a victory that should have been impossible. The girl in the uniform had become something that the galaxy's enemies would learn to fear, a symbol of humanity's talent for being underestimated, and the devastating consequences that awaited those who made that error. As the council session concluded and the various representatives began discussing the practical details of implementing their new security protocols, Admiral Morrison approached Sarah with a slight smile. "How does it feel to be the most famous military strategist in the galaxy?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked out through the chamber's transparent dome at the stars beyond, where cargo ships and passenger vessels moved safely along routes that were no longer threatened by systematic piracy. Somewhere in that darkness, potential enemies were undoubtedly studying the reports of the Battle of Meridian Prime, trying to understand how such a small human officer had orchestrated such a devastating defeat of a numerically superior force. "It feels like the beginning," she replied. "The conspiracy we defeated was sophisticated and well-funded, but it was also limited by its reliance on conventional strategic thinking. There will be other threats that require different approaches. And you'll be ready for them?" Sarah smiled, thinking about the lessons she had learned from being dismissed, underestimated, and ultimately vindicated by beings who had confused her youth and quiet manner with inexperience and weakness. "Admiral, I've spent my entire career being underestimated by enemies who thought they understood human capabilities. Each time, they learned too late that their assumptions were incomplete." She looked back at the council chamber, where representatives from dozens of species were working together to build a stronger, more unified galactic community based on mutual respect and shared expertise. "The galaxy is about to discover that the most dangerous thing about humans isn't our technology or our determination. It's our ability to exceed expectations when everyone else has stopped paying attention." Admiral Morrison nodded approvingly. "And Lieutenant Commander Chen?" "Yes, sir. I have a feeling that the next time the Council faces an impossible threat, they're not going to dismiss the girl in the uniform." Sarah Chen, the young woman who had become the most feared tactical mind in the galaxy, simply smiled and turned her attention to the next challenge that awaited humanity among the stars. The universe was vast and full of potential enemies, but she had learned something important from her first major victory. Being underestimated wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon, and she intended to use it.